It's yellow.
Yellow means healing.
And we're live. And we're live now.
Way to go.
Oh my gosh.
Nerd. Doesn't really affect you, but it affected me. So I met with all the other CIS teachers and we talked about
Who are so much smarter and better.
Yep. And what your next paper will be about. About why were slaves motivated to work hard?
Because they were gonna die.
Then they wouldn't get their rations of food.
Okay, so
They're gonna lose their families.
And not to impress you, but I mean that starts soon. As you finish up paper number 1, which is due soon, we start paper number 2. So
It's a week from tomorrow.
okay, so
I was already.
here we go. So phones really vary. There are some of you who still aren't done with your essay. Come on now. Come on. You can do it. Okay.
I'll do it today, I promise.
Sorry?
Do you need our graded ones back?
Yes, eventually.
Yes.
Yes. No, but eventually. Okay. The brand new Unite, I will take a significantly less chunk of time
No.
because we want to finish both
I
of
like
the
it, I know.
documents about issue number 2, which was the Sedition Act. Excuse me. So the brand new United States has already had difficulties. Do you remember we had difficulties with the pirates off the north coast of Africa? Remember? Yes, we talked about that in here. Yep. Okay. Well, what about Britain? So one of the things that the British were supposed to have done because of the treaty that they signed with us creating the United States was abandon all forts west of the original 13 colonies, but east of the Mississippi. So between the Appalachians and the Mississippi, that there were a series of forts that the British occupied, but they're not supposed to occupy it anymore because it's ours now. And here are some examples. This is known as the Ohio River Valley. And you can see all these forts, and some of them look pretty French. Why do they look pretty French? I mean, this is Fort Le Boeuf, and this is Fort Pascal-Aillet, Fort Bishop, Fort Duquesne. These are all French-sounding forts, and yet I'm telling you that they're British forts.
The British defeated the French and claimed their fort.
Very good. Remember, these were originally French forts that the French abandoned after the French and Indian War, and now they became British forts, and now supposedly they're supposed to be American forts, but the British refused to leave. They were not honoring the agreement of 1783, Treaty of Paris, and we didn't like that very much. Okay. The other thing that the British were doing was they were weaponizing the Native Americans that were in the Ohio River Valley. They were weaponizing them. Why? That's right. The enemy of my enemy is my friend. We are going to arm the Native Americans so that they can be a thorn in the side of this silly little thing, the United States, which will go away soon. It won't last. We shall have our opportunity of taking it back. One of the Native American groups were the Miami, not the Miami in Florida, but the Miami in Ohio. The Miami, they're a Native American tribe. Okay. So they are armed, they are weaponized, and they do something. So the Miami, which is in the Ohio River Valley, it's in the same region as over here. They actually launched an attack. They concluded that the only way that they're going to succeed is actual physical war. So you can see here 1791. So just try and understand, how old is the U.S. at this time? About 8 years, that's right. So we became a nation in 1783. 8 years later, the Miami launched an attack over land. That's the dispute. It's over land. They think it's theirs. We think it's ours. The British, to stoke the confrontation, arm the Miami, and sort of say, you could do it. Come on, go get the Americans, right? All right. Next question would be this. How old is the U.S. Constitution by this time? Yeah, about 4 or 5 years old. So do we have a president? We do, actually. George Washington is president. We now have a president. He was first elected 1789. So, about 2 years of G-Dub's first term. He is president. The response to this attack was an American response. So the 1794 Battle of Fallen Timbers, this is one of these major battles that you will hear again and again and again. The initial attack is an Indian victory, and then the Americans are like, okay, you've had your fun, and now we shall wipe you out. And that's exactly what happened. This is an American victory, which led to this treaty, the Treaty of Greenville. And you will notice a pattern with these treaties that the Americans signed with Native Americans. It goes something like this. The Native Americans agree to give up land, and in exchange, the U.S. agrees to take it. All right, you know what I mean? Not exactly fair, not exactly impartial, but sorry, we beat you. Should we have been fairer to the Japanese after World War II? No, you lost, we won. We don't make the treaty fair. We reward the winner in a treaty. Okay. Any questions here? Let's keep going. Meanwhile, always remember that the French and the British are at war. During this entire process, the French have beheaded their king, and they're trying to establish another type of government. The French Revolution is very violent, much more violent than the American Revolution. In many ways, the American Revolution was really weird. The reason it's called a revolution is because this group overthrows that group, but then this group overthrows that group, and then that group overthrows that group, and then this group retains power, and then on and on and on. I mean, look at the French Revolution. The king was deposed, and then Napoleon ended up. That's what happened. The French said, we want democracy. Now this dictator is going to take over. That's not democracy. What happened? Well, the group that overthrew the king was overthrown by another group that was overthrown by another group. And finally, Napoleon said, this is chaos. I'm going to take over. The military is going to take over. And he crowned himself emperor. And I mean that. He crowned himself emperor, right? Usually it was the Pope that put the crown on. And this is true. When the Pope tried to crown Napoleon, Napoleon grabbed it and said, I got it. I crown me, which was a symbolic way of saying, I don't recognize your authority to crown me. I crown me. Well, anyway, Napoleon lost. The French crowned the family of the beheaded. It's not like the beheaded guy was like, I'm back, right? I can't do that. But his brother took over for a while, and then Napoleon came back. It's just a mess. Ours was, we deposed the British. The end. I mean, that was about it. That's why you have to understand that rebellion, the Whiskey Rebellion, was a significant threat. That was normal to attempt to overthrow the government in power. The fact that it just didn't really happen here is the abnormal thing. Okay, back to this. The French and the British are at war, which means that the French possessions in the Western Hemisphere, the Caribbean, are subject to British attack. So you can see here that in the French West Indies, the British were aggressive. Any American ship trying to trade. So American ships are heading to the French islands to trade. The British capture the ships. Well, who does that not make happy? Who says, well, I don't like that very much? Is this a tough question? American boats are going to French territory and the British stop it and take it. Yeah, okay, very good. Mostly us, right? This is an American history class. And the British impressed U.S. sailors. So picture this. You're on an American boat. You're an American naval it's not the American Navy. This is a boat filled with stuff, cotton. And here comes the British naval vessel and the British soldiers are doing this. And you're like, wow, I am impressed.
Nothing.
Not what that means. Not what that means. Okay, this could say drafted. Drafted. Imagine that. You were working on this American boat. It's filled with cotton. You're on your way to some French island. The British naval vessel comes alongside you. Welcome to the British Navy. And we want you because you speak American. You speak English. And American sailors were known as pretty good sailors. So there. Now, again, who doesn't like this? Okay, we don't like this very much. Can you see how there's a recipe for conflict here between us and the British? Why aren't you leaving? Why are you giving our enemies guns? They're killing us. Hey! Question? So you can see that conflict is on the horizon. But now we're looking at a couple of treaties. This treaty was between the US and Britain. This treaty was between the United States and Spain. So the recipe for conflict, and if you recall, 2 days ago, I told you why the US was in conflict with the Spanish. Remember, they controlled New Orleans, and we were disagreeing over Florida. Well, let's settle this. Let's settle this. So 2 treaties. One's called Jay's Treaty. Significant agreement between the United States and Britain. The British agreed to leave, and this time they meant it. By the way, they didn't. The British, look at the amusing thing that they agreed to here. The British agreed to pay for all the boats they sank. Do you notice what they haven't agreed to do? Oh, we sank another boat? We'll pay for that. How about stopping the sinking of American boats? But they didn't. Can you understand why? Who are they at war with?
French.
France. So it's in their interest that American stuff not reach France. So brilliant idea. Sink the American boat and then pay the Americans. Great. The Americans agreed to things too. The Americans agreed to, remember, the US was heavily in debt. The part of the debt was to Americans. Actually, did you know that you know that the United States is about $20 trillion in debt today? Do you know who that money is mostly owed to? Us. We owe us. We owe ourselves. The US borrows from you. That means the US owes you money. Do we owe China? Yeah, a bit, but it's not like the Chinese are going to move in and say, nah, we'll take the Statue of Liberty. No, that's not reality. Okay, we mostly owe us. The Americans were heavily in debt to Americans, and many of those Americans were royalists during the Revolutionary War. Does anyone know what that means? Yes, they wanted the British to win. What happened was that when the U.S. became an independent country, the debts to the royalists were like, screw you, we're not paying them. Well, we promised, all right, we'll pay them. Okay, we'll pay it off. And then they settled the border between the United States and this thing called Canada. Remember, they confiscated Vermont and said, this is ours now. Well, no, it's not. Vermont's ours. So we'll agree to a definite border between the U.S. and this thing called Canada. All right, everything's better with the British then, right?
Nope.
Okay, right. But at least it looked like it for a second. Treaty with Spain, called Pinckney's Treaty. One, the U.S. agreed to, the Spanish agreed to let us use New Orleans. You can pass through New Orleans. Okay. Second thing was they settled the border between the United States and Spain, right? Florida. It would be here. So all of this suddenly became the property of the United States. Does anyone know what Native American group lives there at the time? There's a group called the Creek Indians, and they were not part of the deal. They were not part of the negotiation. So they were left out, which will lead to some interesting things. I have it split into 3 bullets. Navigation and right of deposit are the same thing. We were able to use New Orleans, and we were able to pass along the Mississippi River. That's what navigation of the Mississippi River and this thing called right of deposit. We would be able to use New Orleans as a port. So everything's great. We're making treaties. We're a big boy now. We make treaties. You make treaties. Okay. Questions? 1 slide left. Okay, I am going to invite you to consider that one of the topics of your next essay has to do with freedom of speech, which in fact is the 2 documents we're going to look at today is freedom of speech. Should the government be able to limit speech? This one was a government attempt to limit certain forms of speech. What your essay is going to be about is, can the government do that? This is the example. Here it is. This is your historic example that you are going to refer to if you choose this topic, the Sedition Act. And one of your documents argues that it was absolutely necessary to prevent rebellion. And another document is going to say, no, it violates the First Amendment, freedom of speech. Okay.
Not the more conservatives.
The conservatives, right, would argue less government. In other words, you have to allow speech. Right? Jefferson, allow speech, even if it's offensive. You can't sort of allow free speech. You don't get to say, I agree that you have the right to say what you want as long as I agree with it. That's not free speech. Free speech is you get to express your opinion and I don't like it, but you still get to express your opinion. So the city of Chicago in the 1940s, late 1940s, World War II was over. The city of Chicago realizes that there's a pro-Nazi, this happened, a pro-Nazi speaker who's going to speak in the stadium where the Bears play. Now, this was the old Soldier Field, not that spaceship they play in now, but the old Soldier Field, packed, 70,000 people packed, listening to this guy say that Hitler was right, and the city of Chicago arrested him and said, we're not letting you say that. And he said, freedom of speech, First Amendment. And the city said, riots. There are going to be riots if you speak. So no. Okay, who's right? Who's right? That's a synthesis example, right? And whatever you think is right is right. So let's get back to this. So I've skipped this one for now. I'm immediately addressing this thing called the Sedition Act. So the Sedition Act said that people could be arrested, fined in jail for. Now I think that we're all comfortable with the first one. Freedom of speech does not mean you can go to Miss Donnelly and say, yeah, Potter was selling drugs again. First of all, prove it. Second of all, no, I wasn't. That's a lie. You lied. That is not freedom of speech. You don't get to open that door and yell, fire! No, what fire? Freedom of speech. No, that is not freedom of speech. So I think most of us would look at this one and say, yeah, I get it. It's the second one. It's the second one where people thought, what if you wrote a letter to the editor, printed in the newspaper, and it says, Trump's a moron. We ought to do something about that guy. We ought to do something about that guy. And Farmer Ted lives in Idaho, and he reads the newspaper. He's like, yeah, come on, Bessie. Bessie's his donkey. And they make a pilgrimage to Washington, D.C. And pleased to meet you, Mr. President. This is for you. And he grabs his pitchfork. walks off with Bessie. Okay. If you couldn't figure out what I was doing there, he just murdered the president. Violently. Okay. Now, is he in trouble?
Yes.
Yeah.
He murdered the president. Can't do that.
Or can you?
Am I in trouble?
No.
I wrote the article.
No.
Aha. But this law said, yeah, because my opinion led to violence. Okay, let's go back to Chicago. That pro-Nazi guy, I don't know what his name is, but he was American, and he's about to have a rally. And the city of Chicago arrested him because they said, your speech will lead to riots. So we're going to arrest you. Not for the Sedition Act, for another law that existed. By the way, you'll notice that these laws, these attempts to limit speech, always happen during a war. During World War I, we're gonna encounter a law. All great synthesis examples, by the way, which you have to do. You have to have synthesis one time in your essay. So find the law that limited speech during World War I. Find the law that limited speech during World War II. They're out there. Look at what the U.S. government did to people who burned their draft cards during the Vietnam War. And what they did as they threw it on the fires, they said, that's free speech. Burning something is free speech. Look what the government did to those people for their free speech. Okay? Those are riots. And the reason they did this, the government, U.S. government, was we were very young and the fear of being overthrown. The French overthrew their government. We overthrew the British. We might get overthrown. And the way that the Americans overthrew the British was meeting secretly, right? And plotting, scheming, planning. Yep, we can't let it happen. So let's not let it happen. Let's not let this dangerous speech happen. And Jefferson hated it. You can't do that. You can't limit speech. First Amendment, freedom of speech. So the Democratic Republicans hated it, and the Federalists thought it necessary. I don't want to say they loved it. They just felt it was necessary. So there's your divide. Okay. The Alien Act was another controversial one, although I would say not as controversial as the Sedition Act. The Alien Act gave the president the authority to expel any foreigner that he decided to, which is a sort of a violation of what's supposed to happen, is that a judge is supposed to make that decision, right? That the executive branch goes to the judicial branch and says, we think that these people are dangerous, so hey, judge, give us the authority to expel these people. And then the judge makes that decision. But this is the executive giving the executive permission. Imagine the police getting to decide that if you're guilty or not of a crime. The police don't make that decision. All the police do is arrest you, and then maybe they gather a little bit of evidence, and then they give it to a lawyer. And now the police, which are in the executive branch, hand it over to the judicial branch and say, all right, here's what we think, but it's now in your area. But what if the police got to decide if you were guilty and then they carried out the punishment? That might lead to some possible abusive behaviors on the part of police. Maybe they'll plant evidence. I mean, of course, 99% of police are great, but there's that 1%. And that's the problem here. The president gets to decide if he's going to expel foreigners. No trial. It just gives the president a lot of power, doesn't it? It gives the president a lot of power. And of course, that is a liberal approach. The Federalists said, let's do this. Let's give the government a lot of power so that he can deal with dangerous elements. And again, Jefferson hated it. You're giving our federal government way too much power. Okay? And then it expanded to 14 years before you could become a U.S. citizen. You had to live in the United States 14 years if you moved here idiot lived here 14 years before you became a U.S. citizen. Anyone know what that length is now? It's 5 years. It's 5 years. You have to live here 5 years before you can apply for U.S. citizenship. Jefferson hated these two. So here's what he did. First of all, the Democratic and Republicans made the argument these two things violate the First Amendment. Freedom of speech. Can't do this. Now, what he could have done is Rosa. You know what I mean? What do I mean?
That law is stupid.
And what? Explain what? Yes, it's stupid, but I said that already. Rosa goes one step further.
And she just completely
Violated.
its existence by continuing to say what she does.
Very good. You break the law. You break the law on purpose. And now it's in the court system. And now the court system can determine the constitutionality of that law. But the problem is, in Jefferson's mind, he can't do that because there have only been two presidents, George Washington and John Adams. John Adams is a Federalist. The Federalists were the ones who made this law. So the president gets to name the judges. Federalist president is going to name judges who probably share his view on these laws. So a judge is not going to agree with Jefferson's view in his mind. And George Washington was the other president. And while he was unaffiliated, he sided with the Federalists more often than he sided with the Democratic Republicans. So Jefferson just didn't believe that Rosa-ing was an option. So it says here he couldn't turn to the courts. So what does he do? He comes up with this idea, which is an interesting idea. States can nullify federal laws. So he goes from state to state, and he visits the state capitol, and he visits the legislature of each state, and he gives this idea, nullify those laws. Pass your own state law saying that this state does not recognize these federal laws. Can you do that? Can a state, Rosa?
Yes.
You think? Okay, that's what Jefferson thinks. What I'm asking is, was he right? Right now, if the US government said no marijuana, could a state like, say, Colorado pass their own law saying, Well, the fact is that's exactly what happened. Did you know that marijuana use is illegal in the United States, but legal in Colorado? What? So when you're, smoking a big old fatty and you're on the steps of Denver, are you violating law or not? Okay, there you go. It's like, I don't know. I don't know what to do. Very good. This is an issue called federalism. If it's illegal in the country but legal in the state, what do you do? And as he visited state after state, two said, you're right. Two. The state of Kentucky, the 14th state, right? The original 13. The first state to join after the original 13 was Kentucky. And the state of Virginia passed their own laws nullifying these two laws. Can you do that? Right? And they even said this, if we're forced to recognize these laws, we'll secede. We'll just leave the country. And Jefferson was totally fine with that. Can you do that? Can you leave the country?
The Constitution.
But does the Constitution say you can't? Then you can. But of course, the response was, does the Constitution say you can? Then you can't. Who's right? They're both right. It neither doesn't say you can and it doesn't say you can't. So what do you go with? Well, of course, the Federalists will say elastic clause, and the Democratic Republicans will say 10th Amendment. As a result, they're both right. Now, to make this, to inform you about how this was settled, is it wasn't. It wasn't settled. And of course it wasn't settled. The question of secession would go until the Civil War. This is way before the Civil War. Well, then what happened to these two laws? Well, I don't know if you knew this, but laws have an expiration date. They expire. They either have to be renewed or they die. These two laws simply expired. So the question of whether or not they were constitutional just died because they just went away. So we still don't know if they were constitutional because they just ended. And so the question of can states Rosa would have to be answered later. Right? All we did was kick that problem down the road a bit.
How long was it until they expired?
Right. So the guy that came up with the Kentucky and Virginia resolutions, Jefferson, ended up being president. He doesn't like these laws. And the party that opposed these laws ended up gaining a majority of the House and the Senate. And when the renewal date came up for these two bills, they said, nah, we're not going to renew these laws. So they just died. So these two laws ended up being law, I don't know, maybe 10 years or something like that. And by the way, people were arrested. And I believe Jefferson pardoned all of them. Of course he did, right? I don't agree with the law that has you in jail. So we pardoned all of them. Very good. Any questions? Awesome. This is documents 3 and 4. This is documents 5 and 6, right? Do you see it? Okay. Put our notes away, that's it. Let's attack documents 3 and 4 in class right now. No need for you to move to where your fellow numbered people are.
We tried making us go with backwards yesterday.
Who did?
Eve.
There you go, Eve. You're a leader.
I said who had document 3 and no one answered.
Who did have document 3? Do we have a document 3 group in here? Don't be shy. There's no way that I happen to have this hour nobody that has document 3. That is statistically really unlikely. Who's lying? Stop it. You're violating the Sedition Act.
Your mom.
My mom's dead. Yeah. Well, she's deaf. What good are deaf people? Okay.
Oh my God.
All right. Well,
What are we
I guess
talking
we'll
about?
have to attack this thing together.
Let's wing it.
Together.
Okay. Well, the issue is speech. You have it. Okay. So the issue is speech. The specific historical example is the Sedition Act. I'm helping you right now. Allow me to say this. Your second essay, I am going to let you use this packet during the writing of that essay, including that lovely thing.
Wow.
In addition, you can also print out the quote that you need to find. That quote can take up space on one piece of paper, and then whatever space is left, front and back, is yours to use
Yay.
during the essay part. Okay? Okay. Having said that. So, document 3, who wrote it? Yes, John Allen. And who is John Allen?
One-term congressman.
Yes, that's insignificant. Who is John Allen?
Federalist.
He's a Federalist. He's a Federalist. That's who he is. Federalist, which means conservative or liberal.
Liberal.
Liberal, which means hooray for the central federal government, or
Yes.
boo hiss for the central government.
Central government.
Hooray for the central government, which means we need to protect free speech, or we need to prevent rebellion. We need to prevent rebellion, which means we need to limit dangerous speech, which means hooray for the Sedition Act. My friends, we just analyzed this document. That's what it's saying. I mean, and here I think he talk about, you think it's unconstitutional, but you're wrong, because it's not, because it prevents dangerous speech. And doesn't he talk about the French Revolution? Yeah, he does.
talks about how he doesn't want the same thing that happened in Britain to happen to America.
France.
Oh. I thought
He doesn't want what happened in France to happen in America.
Yeah.
Right. Let's see, second paragraph where he started to write, at the commencement of the revolution in France. They're starting off, they're advocating liberty and freedom, and it's all great. And then people start losing their heads. It's chaos. It's the sheep running the ranch. The sheep outnumber the shepherd, right? They do. There's 1,000 of them and one shepherd. But who should run the thing? The shepherd. The one shepherd should run the thing because he knows what he's doing. The sheep are idiots. That's what he's saying. If you let the sheep run it, blood and everywhere and sheep and dying all the time. Okay. Any questions there? All right. How about document 4? You had it. You had it. Oh, great. But again, the issue is the same. Speech. The specific example is the same. The Sedition Act. Who wrote it? Really? Isn't it Hortensius? You're right. I'm just pulling your leg here. Yeah, it is George Hay. Hortensius was his pen name. He did not want to be identified. This is common. You want to express your opinion, but you don't want anybody to know it's you, which is sort of ironic because he's arguing for free speech.
Didn't Benjamin Franklin do that?
Yeah, he had a pen name. Yeah, very, very common. Okay.
So French.
Yes, no one figured it out. Benjamin Franklin. Nice. Okay, so George Hay. Who's George Hay?
Basically Jefferson.
Yeah, it's Thomas Jefferson twin, right? Guess what party he belonged to?
Conservative.
Democratic Republican. So that means conservative or liberal. It means conservative, which means hooray for the power of the federal government, or let's limit the power of the federal government.
Who his government?
Who is federal government, okay? Conservatives, even today, conservatives are not who his government. Conservatives, Republicans, are let's let states do these things. So why have, as an example, Obamacare? Obamacare is federal government running healthcare. Conservatives, Republicans, argue, why don't we just let states do it? Let Wisconsin run its own, let Minnesota run its own, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. By the way, if you're interested in this issue, the response of liberals to that is because some states won't. Some states won't do it. Should we let states decide if we should segregate or not? Guess what a bunch of southern states will do? So sometimes states won't do the right thing. And in the example of segregation, you can see that the liberal argument was kind of a more valid argument. So no, sorry, the feds are going to run the segregation thing. Stop it. But there are other issues where, you know what, maybe the conservative view is right. Maybe states should run it. Like, for example, this school. The federal government has almost nothing to do with education in Wisconsin. The federal government does a couple things. One, they test you. The feds run the state tests. And second thing is they feed you. They pay for all your lunch. That lunch, I know it's hard to believe, but that lunch that you paid, what, $4.50 for? I don't even know what you paid. How much you pay?
Like, or something.
$3 something? It actually is more, I know it's hard to believe, but it's actually more expensive than that. The federal government pays for all of your lunches, partly. That's what the federal government does, that's it. Otherwise, states, you do it. Okay, so by the way, I've just given you a free example of synthesis, including synthesis about segregation. That's synthesis. Who should run these things? Okay. So what do we think about the Sedition Act? What does George Hay think about the Sedition Act? And why? Good. Bad. Yes. Sedition Act bad. Why?
Limit free speech unconstitutional.
There it is. It's unconstitutional. You can't limit speech. You can't say, well, sometimes. It's all or none. We either have a First Amendment or we don't. And by the way, we do. It's there. First Amendment. Okay? Freedom of speech. Okay? There. Well, we did it. Good work. Any questions? Yeah, that's it.
You have to find it. I'm still confused on the quote. Like, what do you mean? Like, find a quote?
So she's expressing concern about finding a quote. Do you remember the first essay? You had to look at the writings of Zinn versus Schweikert and Allen. Well, I'm sure Zinn and Schweikert and Allen have commentary about these things. And by the way, they do. The entire history book of Zinn is available online. Just type Google People's History of the United States. There it is, the entire thing. Find the chapter which addresses Zinn's summary of the Sedition Act. Find something that he has to say. Find Schweikert and Allen's. He does too. Find any historian. There are more than those two historians. Fine. I mean, if you wanted to, go ahead, borrow that book. That one right there, the red one.
Schweikert's first name is Larry.
Larry. Does that decrease his credibility for you? No historian should be named Larry.
What's
Okay.
Alan's first name?
Any historian. Or find a synthesis quote. Find a quote where some important president is defending the, what was it called during World War I? Wilson signed it. It was called it's when you're
Where do we plug this quote into the essay?
anywhere, wherever it would fit. Take that back.
All right, never mind.
Wait, what was the question?
No, it wasn't a stupid question. I was saying what I said in jest. Your second essay is right here. There's the prompt. There it is. You will pick 2 of the 3
Are all essays like that?
options. Yeah. They're usually, here are 3, you pick 2.
Oh, geez. I just got
Okay? In paragraph, let's just say you're gonna pick the first 2. In paragraphs 2, you present the Federalist point of view. In paragraph of economic issues. In paragraph 3, you present the Federalist point of view of free speech. In paragraph 4, you present the Democratic Republican view of economic issues. In paragraph 5, you present the Democratic Republican view of free speech.
Is it okay if I
The
don't know?
side you disagree with, the side you disagree with, the side you agree with, the side you agree with. Or some of you can do it the other way. Side you agree with, side you disagree with, side you agree with, side you disagree with, side you agree with. You have to decide which point of view
It
do
ends
you
up
agree
being-
with.
being in your
Do you see it
thesis.
the way the Federalists see it? Or do you see it the way the Democratic Republicans see it? And again, it has to be 2-0. You have to agree with one party for both, of
Is it okay if you don't know yet?
course.
Do you have more of the blue book essay format sheets or no?
Oh, yeah.
You're in the white box over there.
No, I think she's asking for the way you
Yeah.
write the whole, yeah, I've got those somewhere.
Why do you have a picture of a lock under your mentions?
Oh, this was part of American infrastructure building. They built canals.
Oh, I saw one of those working. I went to, oh geez, where'd I go?
Crazy?
Yeah.
Anyone else want a, it's
Yeah.
the way you write the essay things?
I need a fresh one.
You have this already.
Billy ran out.
Why is this with my? I can't. But like, it was like a huge canal and it was like a barge.
Just no.
And you saw it like go in and then it like sank down and then it like.
Larry Allen.
Yes.
Larry Allen and Michael Allen.
Oh, I should stop recording.
Larry Schwartz.
Bye, people.
Bye.
Why do I like that so much?